Thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Implementation and Scale Up webinar series, and today's topic is the next level, what's new in the updated state benchmarks of quality with Angie Von Polen and Beth Forhouse. So thank you very much, and please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited that you're here. I am Beth Forhouse, and I'm with Angie Van Polen from the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. And we are here to talk all things about the new State Benchmarks of Quality 3.0. So if you have a chance, please download, if you have not already, the documents that are available. The next level, what's new to the updated benchmarks of quality and the State Benchmarks of Quality 3.0. These documents will help us follow along today and learn about what's new and what's happening with the new State Benchmarks of Quality 3.0. So Angie's controlling from the other side, so you might hear us saying, hey, next slide, please. And so let's start and dig in. What hasn't changed? This is still the State Benchmarks of Quality, and it is still rooted in implementation science. And it really still supports facilitating the translation of research into practical applications for states. And it allows it for your state-specific context, as well as strengthening your outcomes. You'll still be able to monitor your progress across the key stages of implementation science, from exploration to installation to initial implementation to full implementation, and of course, for sustainability and scale up. It is still framed in the 4 essential structures: the state leadership team, the professional development network, implementation sites, and the use of data decision-making. There are still critical elements and benchmarks, of course. Some have been rewarded, others have been left behind, and there are some new additions that we'll get to talk about today. The scoring is still the same. We still have 0 for not in place, 1 for emerging, and 2 in place. And we also, of course, still have the Excel that you can enter your data and graph from year to year, so you can see your progress as you go on. So let's continue and talk about what's new. So as we dig into the State Benchmarks of Quality 3.0, Angie and I are going to step into and talk through the changes as well as the new components of the tool. And this revised tool makes it easier for you as state leaders to structure your implementation within your state systems to support scale up and sustainability, while still making sure collaboration and communication is happening across all levels of implementation in your state. Pop to the next slide, Angie. And so as we're doing this, we want to ground ourselves in some words. And this collection of words that you see on your screen are words that you will see throughout the benchmarks, and you'll see them in indicators as we talk about them. So starting out with early childhood sectors, we will refer to sectors as the diversity of entities and programs and organizations that provide services to children and families. These are funded and regulated by different systems. Some of the examples of these are public pre-K, child care, Part C and early intervention, Head Start, early Head Start, family child care, tribal nations, and other programs that serve children and families. When we think about these are folks that are implementing pyramid model in their settings. Also, sectors for our work can be entities that have vested interest in social emotional well-being of young children and their families, such as organizations providing child welfare services, mental health, family support, healthcare, housing, or preparation of early educators. Note for both of these, the sectors that have the vested interest as well as implementing sectors, there can be lots of different entities. If you would like, you can put into the Q&A some of the sectors that you are involved with your state teams, so we can see kind of some of the diverse sectors that are happening across our country. So the next term is cross-sector state leadership team. We've been using this term for several years, but giving us a clear definition as we develop this revised version of State Benchmarks of Quality. The state leadership team can be made up of representatives from various early childhood sectors, And this term is used to represent a collaborative group of representatives from diverse programs and services across the state that support children and families. And those are all those sectors I spoke about just a moment ago. This team, of course, coordinates and informs statewide implementation of the pyramid model. And then finally, the last two pieces on our key terms is a new one that has been developed through our revision process. Sector planning and implementation team called the SPLIT. When relevant for a state, a sector planning and implementation team can convene to develop plans for implementing pyramid model within their sector. Kind of an example of this could be a team that supports the implementation of Part C early intervention. This team would coordinate the Part C intervention work for the state, working with program implementation coaches and trainers to support implementation with coaches and early interventionists. The SPLIT would share data implementation back with the SLT in collaboration to support statewide coordination and inform implementation. So that is one of our newer terms. And then one that I know from our innovations cohort, community-wide implementation team, the CIT for short, is a community-wide implementation of the pyramid model, which is a collaborative effort by cross agencies to implement the pyramid model across service agencies and programs in a community. Community implementation is typically guided by a team of individuals from early childhood programs, family groups, and other services, some of those sectors that we named earlier, and providers who are deeply invested in the promotion of young children's social and emotional behavioral development. The CITs, community-wide implementation teams, collaborate with the state team to identify available resources and personnel that can support their local efforts and to share information regarding the implementation progress. It's important to note, not all states are going to have a community-wide implementation team or a sector planning implementation team. And we'll talk about how that looks when you're completing your newly revised state benchmarks of quality.
All right, so we talked around, we do have some new wording for those 4 essential structures. So they're there, but we've changed them for the benchmarks of quality specifically. So if you still go to ECTA and you look at the SIG, the statewide implementation guide, you're going to see the same wording there, but we have changed some wording to fit our context. So you'll still see state leadership team is the same. Professional Development Network, our PDN, we've added trainers and program implementation coaches, and we'll show you the difference as we go through the benchmarks of quality here today. And then the other change is implementation programs. We've added programs and community-wide implementation. And then lastly, we still have data and evaluation. So then the new critical elements and benchmarks that we'll go through today, you will see a section, coordination of sector implementation. You'll see community-wide implementation, and you'll also see family participation and engagement. We have moved family engagement up and under the state leadership team section of the new BOQ. Sorry, I keep losing my mouse. So other new components to the benchmarks of quality. So when you are filling out and rating your BOQ, you will now see a priority column and you can check that. It's just a checkbox. Like, so say your team is going through and you decide like, ooh, number 2, establish a clear written mission and vision. We really want to highlight that and work on that as a priority. Within our action plan, we would mark that and go through each as we would like and mark them. And also, you will also see a notes section. So we know like the conversation is one of the most important things as you go through and evaluate each of these and decide, okay, you know, is it in place? Is it not in place? And so we want to make sure that people are capturing those conversations as you go. And so that they're there maybe the next time when you go through, you can remember like, oh, why did we rate it a 1? And so that piece will still be there and right there handy for you. And then additionally, thanks to Myrna and updating the Excel workbook, you now have like, so if you mark something as a priority, it will graph this in the back for you to see like, okay, which ones did we mark? And so that way it's just a quick look for your team to be able to go and know which ones you have determined as priorities and want to action plan around.
All right, so before we start digging into the essential structures, I want to make some important scoring reminders out there. In the new document, the next level, what's new to the updated state benchmarks of quality, on the back page or the second page, depending how you copied it off, or if you're looking at it an electronic version, there's a red box. And these are really important reminders and things to think about as a team while you are using the state benchmarks of quality. All the critical elements and benchmarks of the BOQ are meant to inform current teamwork, the status and future action planning, that scale up, the sustainability, and back to implementation science. It is not a pyramid model implementation fidelity tool. It's really an action planning tool for the state leadership team. Bullet number 2 here on this slide, if the state isn't currently prioritizing or formally structuring its efforts around a specific sector or community-wide implementation, the new benchmarks can be marked 0 for future consideration. It can be a priority. It can be one that we might think about in the future. Then the last bullet kind of connects what Angie was just sharing about the priorities. One of the, and we'll talk about a little later in the webinar about some of our pilot groups that used the tool. And I found the priority was really handy for teams to stop and note where they were heading when they completed an essential structure. What were their priorities? Also, another way, one of the teams that I worked with actually had the team members go back and think about what their priorities were in small group and select those priorities, and then came back and had some very rich conversations around priorities with this new way to think about documenting the work. And so I see Erica ask a question. I'm going to jump this in, Angie, before we move on. As a program implementation coach, should I encourage the site I support to transfer the BOQ data to this new template they just completed in May? So I am assuming, Erica, since you are a program implementation coach, that you might not be talking about the state benchmarks of quality. This webinar is about the state benchmarks of quality, which is similar to what programs fill out, but it's the program benchmarks of quality is a separate tool, and that one has not been revised. So if you're working with a program, they can continue using that one. If you are a state and have just completed your benchmarks of quality, this is one that you can wait and do your next iteration, because we do recommend that you do it every year. So you can wait and do it that way, or you can choose to do it again. But what we have found, states that piloted with us, that it came out, they actually piloted it, and on the side did the older version and really appreciated the new version with ways for action planning and thinking about some of the implementation pieces. So it's really kind of a choice to make. Angie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was great.
All right. So we can go on to the next slide.
All right, so we're going to start jumping into the actual benchmarks for you to see the difference around the new ones and maybe new wording, and some are still the same. So just know that as we go through, we are going to highlight specific ones that maybe are brand new, or some of the wording changes, so that you get familiar with what they are. So the state leadership team, the critical elements, we have our numbers 1 through 32 for the benchmarks. And so what you'll see here is we still have state leadership team membership and logistics, action planning, sustainability and scale-up planning, communication and visibility, authority, priority, and communication linkages, family participation and communication, and additional SLT coordination. And we're going to go through each one of these to show you changes specifically on some of them. So if you're someone that wants to know, well, what's the old one? What's the new one? The differences between like how many benchmarks there are, because I know Beth, one of her pilot sites, they did really want to know some of that. So I've included it here. So the ones in red are the old benchmarks of quality, the numbers. So state leadership team membership and logistics, the old one you would see benchmarks 1 through 10. The new one is 1 through 13. Okay, so starting off here with membership and logistics, some of the changes you will see. Number 3 here, the state leadership team identifies a state coordinator or co-coordinators to represent the state leadership team, work with staff to facilitate the work of the SLT, and coordinate the activities of professional development network of program implementation coaches and trainers. We really know that many states are moving from 1 coordinator to 2 or 3, and we wanted to make sure that we captured that because there is a lot of work that goes into this, a lot of coordination, and so we want to make sure that there's enough FTE being put forth to make these things happen. Number 4, SLT includes adequate and clearly defined administrative support for team logistics. And so thinking about that, we want to make sure that we define the roles of those that are on the state leadership team and who will be responsible for how your team functions. And so thinking about some of the logistics of like, who's going to set up your virtual calls? Who's sending out that calendar invite? Who's preparing if you're doing in-person meetings? So who's getting the room reserved? Who's setting it up for it to be working when everyone arrives? And then who's taking notes? Who's maintaining, if you have a Google folder that you're sharing everything in, who's making sure that gets updated and maintained? Adding to your roster, who's new, who needs to come off. And so just thinking through all those responsibilities that have to be done as a leadership team, who's going to do those, and having that written out so everyone knows. And then number 5, the pyramid model initiative and the activities of the state leadership team are supported by funded individuals or entities to participate in the work. And so we want to make sure that people that if they're coming to these meetings, that obviously they're getting paid to be there and no one's doing this for free. And then also that if they are supporting activities, say that you have mapped out, whether it's in your sustainability and scale up plan, your action plan, but trainings, whatever it may be, the folks that are participating in that are there and they have time to do that. So under the critical element SLT action planning, we have some word changing on this. So for 14, the state leadership team develops an action plan to include goals and objectives related to the critical elements of the benchmarks. And the action plan guides the work of the state leadership team and the work groups. So yes, we know it guides the work of the leadership team, but we wanted to be more explicit around that teams do have work groups and that these are part of the work that needs to get done. And then on 15, we have added that you will be reviewing and updating the progress on the action plans regularly. So your team will decide what does regularly mean, and then that's what you will ensure that you're doing. So is that after or during or after every state leadership team meeting, if you meet monthly, or do you meet every other month? So you all will determine what that regular means to you. Next, we have the sustainability and scale-up planning. And you will see for the 16 that your written sustainability and scale-up plan, you will base that around these 4 essential structures so that we're making sure that we're hitting each essential structure and thinking back to the benchmarks of quality, like what do we need to do within our sustainability and scale-up plan to ensure that we are making progress and moving forward with those essential structures. So how are we sustaining and scaling up our PDN? How are we doing with our data? Those sorts of things. And then 18 is a new one. So the state leadership team reviews state benchmarks of quality. the state leadership team checklist and sustainability features, sustainability and scale up plan annually, and then other documents that you could be reviewing and updating annually, depending on what your priorities are for your leadership team, could be like your mission and vision statement, your state leadership team membership. Do we need to add anyone? Do we not? Who's here? Who are we missing? Any ground rules and any other logistics that you want to firm up and maybe take a look at to see what's working and what maybe could use some improvement. And then 19, the state leadership team and implementing sectors identify funding sources to cover activities that adhere to the sustainability and scale up plan. So again, if I am a sector, I need to ensure that we have funding to support those activities that we're saying that we want to include as we scale up within our state. So if I am part of perhaps having coaches, and I need to make sure that we have practice-based coaches training offered yearly, then how am I coming forward with money to support that? And I think if we look back at the old one, it would say, you know, find funding for 2 years. Well, we all know, like we've learned from the states, that not everyone has funding for 2 years that they can guarantee. And so we want to just make sure that everyone that's there participating is also looking for and identifying ways in which they can fund the activities that are in the plan. So now we're moving on to the communication and visibility section. And so on number 20, you'll see that we've updated and to be very clear about the language of what this report will be. And so we want to make sure that you're developing an annual evaluation report to show the progress and outcome data and to distribute it to the implementing sectors that are within your work and then the professional development network. Those are 2 added ones. The programs, funders, families, and policymakers were there prior to. So just making sure that we are hitting all those that are part of our team and the work. And then on 22, we added communication. So it's around that developing your written awareness and a communication plan to include those presentations and distributing the annual evaluation report. And so again, that is so like, it's great if you have it, you've written it and it's there, but now what are we going to do with it? Who are we going to give this to? And how are we going to make sure that they get this? And so really coming up with a very clear communication plan of the who and what and who's going to deliver it and those sorts of things. Next is authority, priority, and communication linkages. So I think you may remember the old language was within 2 weeks. All right, so sometimes that worked great, sometimes it didn't always work out. And so we would like your team to really think about what's a reasonable time frame that you all can agree with and live with and make sure that that works for you. And so maybe 2 weeks has always worked great for you and you just stick with that. Maybe you need 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but you as a team will talk about that and make that decision together. On 24, the state leadership team members are responsible for sharing the state leadership team activities with their agency to support the pyramid model initiative. So emphasizing on the responsibility for sharing the activities of state leadership team with their agency or with your agency to ensure like that timely support when possible and where it's maybe needed. And then 25 may look somewhat similar, but it is still different. So members are responsible for communicating their agency initiatives and sector implementation progress and challenges and successes to the state leadership team. So ensuring that there's reciprocity and that sharing from your agency of what their needs are back to your state leadership team so that we always know what is needed to ensure that this initiative continues forward. Okay, so, oops, nope. Oh, I'm just moving down to 26. I thought I moved the slide. Sorry about that. In 26, we have added most of this is the same except for the data sharing. So we've added that section in there to ensure that within your communication protocols and gathering regular feedback, that you're including that data is also getting shared back and forth. And then the new section under state leadership team is family participation and communication. So keep in mind, like, this isn't completely new because we had family engagement before. We've just moved it up into the state leadership team area. So number 28, the state leadership team identifies and supports sectors to make pyramid model family training opportunities available to families. So I'm trying to think through this one. So we've reworded it to be a bit more clear around what the state leadership team's role is in supporting pyramid model family training opportunities. So again, it's not their role to provide it, but they want to ensure that it's happening. And so working with those sectors that are implementing and helping them know, like, what needs to be offered so that there are opportunities. But again, it doesn't fall on the responsibility of the state leadership team to do it, but they will be coordinating it and ensuring that it is available. And then 29, the state leadership team coordinates with member agencies to develop mechanisms for family members to provide feedback. And then the new part of this is the state leadership team uses responses to support local implementation. So again, that support local implementation. So we want to ensure, like, everyone knows, like, why we're gathering information around the implementation and how families are receiving this, so that we can help as a state leadership team support the implementation at that local level, so everyone's feeling supported. And so if we get feedback that, you know, there are specific things that families are feeling are going really well, like, we might want to inquire with that program or that area to see what they are doing, that it is going really well. And if we see, like, maybe there's not as much information in a specific area with families that they may not feel like they're getting, then again, that's for us as a leadership team to look at that information that's been gathered and help support them to be able to do that. And then 30, the state leadership team can help coordinate getting family-related training and communication materials in the home languages of participating programs. So again, it's not the job of the state leadership team to do this. And one of the reasons is that we've found out through our work with states is that there are many local agencies where programs are that do a lot of translation. And so again, like, just making sure that if it's needed, that we're coordinating those efforts and we're helping programs find ways in which that they can get it to the languages that are in their area, their region. And then lastly, the new additional state leadership team coordination. So again, this is a new section. And so 31 allows for statewide coordination of agencies to evaluate what they are able to contribute to the pyramid model efforts. And then, oops, I guess I forgot to click these, but they're both new, so they're both in red. And then 32, we want to make sure each sector is reporting back to the state leadership team with information on their implementation plans and offering feedback on what's working and what might need to happen to improve the pyramid model implementation within their respective sector. So I think that's all I have for the SLT section. Did any questions pop up, Beth?
No, I don't have any other questions. We had some questions about PIDs, and hope Faisal jumped in and let folks know that it will be updated in PIDs. They're working on that. The logistics and timing are coming along for that. So no other questions at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Not a problem. All right. So as Angie mentioned when she talked about the essential structure wording change, that the professional development network changed of program implementation coaches changed to professional development network of trainers and program implementation coaches. as these two roles can be the same person, or in a lot of states, we see that as separate roles. And so when we thought about this essential structure, we really want to make sure that we emphasize both roles, both the program implementation coach and the trainers. And so as you're looking at this essential structure, the critical element that no longer exists within the document is the ongoing support and technical assistance, but no worries, that did not disappear. It's just been adapted within the benchmarks and have been included in the revised critical element organization. And so now the critical elements for this structure have been divided into 3 sections. One is the professional development network of trainers and program implementation coaches. Those are the items that are all together that serve both program implementation coaches and trainers. And then a separate critical element for each, the trainers and the program implementation coaches. So total now that there are 11 benchmarks, from 33 to 43, if you're counting. And the benchmarks under each are specific to the roles respectively. In the older version, we did not call out trainers who we know are key personnel in the implementation and scaling and the sustainability of pyramid model. So that is what it looks like. And you can click and you'll see the old version come up. And so you'll notice in red the old benchmark numbers, and it was just one whole section of the PDN with implementation coaches. You can go on to the next slide, Angie. And so let's dig into the changes here and of the critical elements. And in this critical element, starting with 33, we can clearly see implementation science at the forefront. It is a new benchmark. And from your initial implementation, you need to have clear roles and responsibilities for the coaches and the trainers for the entire PDN. And so in the old version, it just wasn't clearly defined. It was just guidelines for identifying recruitment and acceptance criteria. And then in number 34, the SLT develops and implements quality assurance mechanisms to maintain an up-to-date and effective training of our program implementation coaches and trainers, and also technical assistance for those coaches and trainers. So this item is really looking at who is coaching the coach and who are the trainers and who are they training to fidelity with pyramid model. So the key change here is making sure that the coaches and trainers are up to date on training and have support they need to support programs and practitioners in the field. And then item number 35, the new pieces are really that the state implements, monitors the training and the coaching. This item, a team can focus on action planning of how to get access, who's getting access to the training and the coaching. And then in the long term, thinking about sustainability, making sure different parts of your state have access and have availability to get a trainer or to have a program implementation coach. You can go on to the next set. And so here we're going to break down into the professional development network of trainers first, and then we will come to coaches as well. And in this, these, of course, are all blocked in red because they are new, because they are specific for trainers. And they're going to look very familiar as they are basically what those trainers are, or what they did both as coaches in the older version. And so number 36, we're establishing, coordinating a statewide network of trainers. And then in 37, establishing written procedures for recruitment and identifying those trainers, along with having written agreements, which is more specific than the old SBoQ that specifically identifies the commitment to training and eventually coaching in the program implementation coaching critical element. And then 38 is new, with the SLT developing and coordinating a sequence of training as well as support for trainers. So pyramid model trainings can be more standard across the state, and knowing the expectation of what types of training to work toward pyramid model implementation fidelity. All right, and we can head then to the next slide. And so This is the professional development network of program implementation coaches critical element, and it will look very similar to what we just looked at for the trainers. And so just to highlight, number 40, the written agreement is also included for the coaches, just like it was for the trainers. And in number 42, the SLT is going to monitor the availability of program implementation coaches for knowing how many program leadership teams and community leadership teams are they working with? Do they have capacity to add more? Is there a need for additional program implementation coaches in an area because they are at capacity? And then number 43, it comes back to that the SLT is the coordinating body across all the sectors, and the sectors could be reporting information back and should be to the SLT from, for example, 42 saying, hey, our program implementation coaches are really flooded. They have got lots of starting up leadership teams, and community-wide is starting. And so the state team can figure out how to work on capacity and figuring out how to get program implementation coaches to support the work that is happening. So any questions about the professional development network changes? And I don't see any coming up on our Q&A. Feel free to add. We'll have time at the end to answer questions as well. So I'm going to pass it to Angie to talk about the changes to implementation programs and community-wide implementation.
Great. All right, so here we are. So the old section to this, the heading was implementation and demonstration programs sites. And so you will see that we no longer have demonstration sites as part of the benchmarks of quality, or benchmarks of quality. So again, if you're interested in knowing what the old versus the new looks like, you will see here the addition of benchmarks added. Just so you know, we now have 3 critical element headings with a total of 8 benchmarks compared to the old section, there were 4. Oops. Oh, sorry. Hang on here. Okay, so since this is all new, I did not highlight any because it would just all be highlighted. So here we go. So I'll go down the left column. So looking at implementation programs. The implementation programs and community-wide implementation you will see are pretty parallel in the wording for them. So making sure that the SLT will develop and coordinate recruitment and selection processes, have written agreements for participation in the Pyramid Model Initiative, and written sustainability plans to build capacity and expansion of programs and communities if you're doing work. And now remember, Beth mentioned earlier that if you're not doing work in community-wide, it is a-okay to mark one as a 0 or all 1, 2, 3 of those as 0s. It's okay. Don't worry about that. And then 50 and 51, again, additional implementation coordination. So what are the additional things that a state leadership team might need to be thinking around for programs and community-wide? And so again, providing protocols for recruitment and onboarding procedures for sectors to participate in the initiative. So if anyone wants to come in and be part of it, then like, what do we need to do to ensure that they know what their steps are? And then each implementing sector can work with its own, what we referred to earlier as a split, so their own sector planning and implementation team to recruit and onboard and provide ongoing implementation support within their sector. And then lastly, 51, again, in consultation with the state leadership team, sectors can identify and coordinate where and how programs have access to prevention, promotion, and intervention services within the pyramid model framework.
All right, so now we have made it to the last essential structure, data and evaluation. And as Angie talked about, the wording of the essential structure has changed. It was evaluation, database, decision-making. And we also changed the critical element, and it's just a wording change from database decision-making to now data-informed decision-making. And as you just see, the items in the new version are 52 to 59, and Angie, you can click to the override version of 44 to 49. And this is just because of the additional adding of benchmarks that the numbers have drastically changed. So you can see we've ended up with about 10 more benchmarks in our revision. Kind of like to see those back and forth in those numbers. And you can go on to the next slide. And so just a quick piece on the benchmarks here for data and evaluation. The benchmarks have been updated to focus on the need for states have data systems in place, have data sharing and interagency data agreements and in place for them to get aggregate data for the SLT to use in decision making. And so you see that really clearly in items 52 and 53, that there's a system in place and then there's data sharing agreements for all involved in using the data. And then in addition to the written agreements in place for all sectors, programs, and communities, and program implementation coaches, there is the need to submit that data per the agreements. And so these are written agreements to make sure everybody knows where the data is coming, as well as working together to share the data. And then we go on to number 55, which is training on the tools and technical assistance for everybody involved with the data, from sectors to programs, communities to trainers. This item really gives states the ability to support everybody knowing the how to collect the data, the why, and how to use it for decision making to improve outcomes for implementation of the pyramid model. And then item 56 is kind of a process, making sure the process is in place for the SLT to have access to the implementation data and the summaries, because that is where all of the pieces back, if we backtrack into the other essential structures, is monitoring what's happening in the field, as well as identifying the needs and planning for scale up sustainability, or coming back and just figuring out capacity. Item 57 describes using the data for ongoing continuous improvement and statewide evaluation of the work. And that's really what I just talked about. And then on number 58, it is still the same, but I want to highlight it. You all need to celebrate your work, because it's absolutely amazing everything the state teams are doing and the states are doing to implement the pyramid model, and take time to celebrate. This is one item that there's no changes, but we still definitely need to do it. You can go on to the next slide. And so then the last item on the new 3.0 state benchmarks of quality is that additional data coordination. And if you've noticed, as we've gone through, each essential structure has an additional piece that is connected to it, and it's really connected to the sector work. So if you have a sector, this is a benchmark that you would need to address. But if not, it can be a 0, and maybe for future consideration that it is something to have. So in this case, there's a system for sector teams to be able to report the progress back, because the state team is the coordinating body of the whole pyramid model implementation, and they need to have the information of what is happening. So that takes us completely through all the essential structures and the new revised version of the state benchmarks of quality. I'm going to pass it to Angie for some other pieces.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that this has been a long process in the making. And so this started way back to where we started planning with Barbara Smith. And so we did some focus groups at NTI back in 2023. So we just want to thank anyone that's on this call and maybe that listens to it later. Like, we appreciate you taking the time to go through, make notes, and give us your thoughts around what needed to be changed around the state benchmarks of quality. So thank you. And then also, we just want to make sure that we mention all the pyramid model consortium state consultants that gave us feedback on this, and especially Rob and Hope at PMC, because they spent several hours with us going over each item and making sure that, you know, all of our experiences were being listened to and being put into the thoughtfulness of each benchmark. And then lastly, we want to say thank you to the states that piloted this version for us before we, got here today to this webinar. So thanks Wyoming and Tennessee and Oklahoma for letting us do this with you and providing us feedback again to know like what tweaks might we need to make to this. And so just a huge thank you to everyone. And so thanks. And then I think lastly, we're ready for questions. If there aren't any in the chat or in the Q&A, go ahead and do that, and we can take a moment to pause.
Angie, while we wait for a moment, I know you had the opportunity to pilot with Wyoming, and I piloted with Tennessee and Oklahoma. Were there any highlights of your piloting from those states, things that they had aha moments about or enjoyed while they were using the new version?
Yeah, so I hope they don't mind. They're a newer state in implementation, and so for them, they'd gone through the old ones only one time before, and so they were doing this now, obviously, for the first time. And they really were able to go through these benchmarks of quality with very few questions. Like they seemed to understand each benchmark. And the other thing was like right away when they got to action planning, they were able to pull specific benchmarks and really get going on what they wanted to focus on. And so we saw traction right away just from that very first time going through them and putting it to work and making progress. What about you, Beth?
I am just checking the Q&A because I had the wrong tab open. So Robin from Massachusetts asks, the store is 0, not an NA. Every item needs to be numbered, is the question she asked. So we left zeros because this is a process that is an ongoing process. It is not, it's not a fidelity tool, but having a 0 is meaning that it is not being considered right now. It's not happening. And so that's why we left the 0, 1s, and 2s as the standard. And I'm going to pause here because I'm reading from chat as well. As we go. So then Julie asked, is there already or will there be a document that shows alignment between the old and the new BOQ? She said it could be very helpful as we focus our shift from documentation to the old and new, thinking like a table-like document. So we have, when we first did the first piloting, the state that I piloted in actually filled out the old BOQ at the same time they were filling out the new BOQ. And at that time, as they went through it, it was one of those, there's a lot that pretty much match up. There are some that are new. And so the consideration was, do we put that all out? Some states might find it handy and others, it's like not something that would be beneficial to them. The 2 states that I did, once they saw the new and started kind of thinking about the different pieces of the new revised version, they said, okay, let's just head off with the new version. So it's really, if it's sit down, if you want to put them side by side, it's not a very difficult lift to figure out what that match is. Angie, anything to add to either of those while I look? There's one that popped up in chat and I'm going to go grab that one. All right, so here's our chat question. Joan asked, I'm unclear of how SLT members who are not funding implementation will weigh in, particularly on the PDN items. Do you want to take that one, Angie, or would you like me to start and you can go?
It doesn't matter. Can you reread the question again, though?
Sure. She said, I'm unclear of how SLT members who are not funding implementation will weigh in, particularly on the PDN items.
I think they still have a voice because, they may not have funding necessarily into it right in the moment, but they might see things along the way that they can contribute to. So again, like I know we talk about funding, but think of all the things that can tend to be in kind resources as well, that they're just allowed to do these things and it doesn't necessarily take the funding to do it. So I think being open, again, having people at the table and open to ideas, whether they are a funder at that time or not, because there's always the possibility that something works out in the near future. What else would you add, Beth?
Well, and I also think about team members at the table that are not necessarily implementing, and it's any item within is they have a voice and they can share that voice. But also, if you're scoring, and when I score with states, I usually have folks with cards that say 0, 1, or 2, or they hold up their hands. And we have a SLT that has a lot of members on it that are both implementing and supporting implementation. They don't have to vote on a particular item if they are not connected to it. But I also always remind teams, this is the SLT as a whole. So hopefully folks know what is happening on their SLT to know where they fit and where that item comes into play for that specific state team. All right, those are the questions we have at this moment. So I think if we have no other questions, we can, oops, yep.
Yep, I think we're turning it over to Victor.
Yeah. Let's turn it to Victor and he will wrap us up here.
All right. Thank you so very much to our panelists for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. So please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your web internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.